These are a series of questions I got asked at the end of a workshop I held, which unfortunately the internet didn't quite work as planned so that I could answer them online. So I'm recording them instead. But I'm doing it in such a way that I'm making these answers available to everyone. The first question is, how do we encourage the 100 languages? I think there's probably 100 answers just to answer that question. But for me, I've worked a lot with creating a listening environment that the children are able to listen to each other and then learn from each other. So there's all of those languages that each child brings to it. But I also wanted to encourage the children to see things from many different perspectives, that there wasn't one way to do something. There are many ways to do something. So for instance, in a robot project, which you can see images from here, we created drawbots using a electric battery-powered massager with pens on, and we used other battery-powered things with pens and pencils on to create movement as they vibrated and went in different directions to draw with. We also designed robot films and tried out different kinds of technologies with filmmaking, because there wasn't just one way to make a film either. So we tried out many different ways. The robots came about from the children discovering that Leonardo da Vinci had invented robots. And so we were using a lot of this history. So we went into the old town of Gamla stan in Stockholm to look at what the kind of buildings would have looked like at the same time as Leonardo da Vinci. So we're connecting the history and actually looking at old armory and other things connected to him. We collected bits of nature and sticks and horse chestnuts, and the children glued them together in robot fashion. So we were using different kinds of materials. The Leonardo da Vinci also was talking about he was a vegetarian, and so we looked more into how do we make food like he did. And so we were constantly thinking about how many different ways can we explore this topic. We did robot dancing. We went to different playgrounds to inspire us. We went to the Technology Museum as well as the Royal Armoury Museum. So constantly looking at different ways to see the same thing. And we constructed and designed robots in many different ways. And we thought about robots from different perspectives. Do we need robots? Do robots think? Do they feel? What would happen if robots did all the jobs in the world? What kind of robot would we like to design? So there were so many different perspectives that we could do. And what I was doing as well was making sure that each child's strength could come out and shine as well. So those ones that had their strength in drawing, they could use their drawing talents to really communicate their ideas. Those who were verbally strong, there were times for them to really communicate their ideas through their words and through storytelling and through song. Then we did movement and we did science experiments. So we were constantly thinking of all of the different ways we could explore this one subject. And this is what I try to do with everything that I approach, that the children can access it in multiple different ways. And we try to look at everything from multiple different angles to try and think of which is the best way for us, what is allowing us to see it as a new unique ways, or a new perspective that opens up other doorways to more knowledge and more experiences and more possibilities. So it really is just trying to unpack a topic or a theme or a project or a subject or a happening or a puddle or a play, anything that we did. We're trying to do from as multiple perspectives and to expose them to that there isn't just one way of doing something, that there is many ways. And I think also to allow mistakes to happen, that mistakes are a part are a language almost in themselves, that we can learn from the language of mistakes. So this question about when documenting the children's work, is it acceptable practice in making it presentable for parents? And is it devaluing it if we cut the children's work or quilt it or write on it or do all of these different things? And I think this is a very personal choice. Me, personally, I think I need to ask the children's permission before I do anything to something that they have created, because it is theirs. And I think it is disrespectful if I can take anything that they've made and change it without their permission or without their interaction either. So if I was to, for example, cut and quilt it to put on a wall, then the children would be part of that cutting and quilting process. Or however how I'm going to put it up on the wall would be about showing the children's work and not my talent at changing their work to make it adult friendly. So for me, it was always very basic, and so the children's work was the first and foremost that you saw. Sometimes, as you can see in these images, I would take photographs of the children's work, and then on those photographs I would add text, and these would go into their files or their portfolios as to save, so that children could actually take their work home as soon as possible, because I found that children really wanted to take what it was that they were creating home as quickly as possible, because that was important to them. So I got to a stage where it was all about ensuring that the children had control over the products that they were producing, and that the focus was on this, the process of it, but there was a valuing of the product. So I don't think it is a process over product, because I think the product is just as important to the child as the process. And if we're going to be changing it, then that is going to affect how the children think about their things that they make, the products that they make, and how we value it. So no, I don't make changes to it. I try to present it in as beautiful ways as possible, so the children feel proud when they see their work on the wall, and that it invites them to look at it, and it's aesthetic. But then I've also had walls and areas on walls where the children could put up their work themselves, and it showed that they were equally proud of a much more chaotic, much messier kind of wall from an adult design or desire of having aesthetics. You didn't have to be straight for them. It curled sometimes at the edges. But there was this area for them to have complete control over what they were putting up, how they were changing it. So I think that also worked for them. So I think sometimes less is more, even with how we're packaging the children's work. If the children have given their consent for you to repackage their work, then I think it's not devaluing the children's work if they've consented. Have you explained what you're going to do so they know? And if they can be a part of it, even better. So the next question is, what do you think will be the impact of a very progressive approach such as Reggio in a system that has embraced the more traditional approaches? And how is a system like in Sweden? Has it always been progressive, so much so that more progressive approaches were easily integrated? I think progressive approaches, like the Reggio Emilia approach, can be difficult for very much more rigid group approaches and traditional approaches, until the people who are involved in it get to know it and get to understand. So I think it takes time, I think it takes advocating as well, and also over time to show the benefits of this, because I think a lot of people have a lot of bias and a lot of prejudice when it comes to things that are non-traditional academic, when it comes to schools and learning and teaching, because that's all they've ever had themselves. That I think it does require this time and good documentation and sharing with the parents so that they understand the processes and can value it themselves too. The system in Sweden, our school curriculum is heavily influenced by the Reggio Emilia approach. You can read it in the curriculum. It's in the undertones of it. And we have had this curriculum since 1998. The curriculum has gone through several changes since it was first written, and it's getting more and more schoolified, despite this feeling of there's play and democracy and children's agency and the documentation and all of this. There is still this need for, they use the word undervisning, which translated into English comes across as instruction rather than just teaching, because we have another word for teaching, which I think it's very strange to use such a school sensed word in preschool. And in the beginning, they defended themselves by saying, "Oh, it's a preschool version of this word, and that we need to redefine it." But it's still, because as soon as you take words that come from the school system that are so loaded with bias and only one way of thinking, which is school, like Malaguzzi was saying, school robs 99 of them. Suddenly, if you're using these words when 99 of the languages of these or interpretation of these words have been stolen of the possibilities, then we're kind of narrowing the possibilities of the early years or what education should be. I think that's is maybe what we should be doing, is trying to refine what is learning. And this is a big part of why I started the original learning approach, was to refine a new space for myself in the beginning, but then eventually for others too, to reconsider how play, learning and teaching are combined together so that children can form understanding, where there is the opportunity for meaning making, world making, and not just and sense making, and not just following the single story of the school. This is how you learn. This is when you learn. This is what you learn. And I think it's important to challenge our ideas of what education is, and to really talk with parents and other educators about what is learning. And this is why I wrote in the original learning approach that we can decide when we want to learn something, but we cannot decide when we want to understand it. And the schools, for instance, they know exactly what they're going to teach, but they don't know when and how and what the children are going to learn. So if you're going to teach a certain lesson, maybe like a lesson on the robots, for instance, different children would have taken different kind of learning moments from one of the activities that I did. For some of them, it would have been the language and the words that would have had the most impact for them. Another one, it might have been the design and the forms, or the shapes, or the colours, or the smells. So each child will be taking something from it that is slightly different from the other. So I can guarantee what I am teaching, but I cannot guarantee what the children are learning, or if the children are learning, because if they're not interested, they're not going to learn either. And so that's why the play for me is always so vital, to help me understand what it is that the brain is interested in, how the children are motivated, and how to maintain their curiosity for optimal learning, because I want to create flow for their play, so a play flow, but also a learning flow where the children are enjoying the learning so much that it almost feels like play. This question is exactly why I started with the original learning approach and trying to work out ways to create a gentle way of supporting societies that see play as an add-on rather than being vital to learning. Because it's not saying, oh, we need to abandon teaching, because teaching is important. Our adult interactions with children, especially young children, is very important. So this is why in original learning we are part teacher, part facilitator, and part play worker. So when I am a play worker, my role is to support the play. That can mean I am hands off and I don't talk. I am just observing and learning from them. Sometimes it might mean I have to intervene to ensure that the children are as safe as possible. Not as possible, as necessary, because children have to be adventurous. And if I'm saying safe as possible, then maybe I'm interpreting it in a way that stops the children from entering play in a more adventurous way. Safe as necessary implies that we understand each child's capacity and their potential, and that we know that the risky and adventurous play that they're doing is within their capacity. They are challenging their own boundaries and expanding their own possibilities. As facilitator, I can maybe play with the children to kind of role model how to interact with each other, but also just to have fun and introduce ideas. There's a kind of equality in this because I'm not leading, but the fact that I'm participating with the children will mean that I am impacting the play. So this is why I don't call this facilitation part the children's actual play. It can be like guided and joy-filled activities. And the facilitation can also be when the children have kind of gone into learning flow and they don't need me as teacher anymore, but they just need me as some kind of guidance to help them maintain that flow. And then my role as teacher, this is when I'm introducing activities, telling them stories, giving little lessons. So it's very much a teacher-controlled, teacher-led, teacher-initiated circumstances where the children are gaining the knowledge that they need in life to be curious, but also opportunities to practice the skills that they need in life. And these skills are what they need to be able to play. Things like self-regulation, listening, resilience, but also the ability to see things from different perspectives. So my philosophy with children, even though it was very child-led, I saw that as a teaching moment, because I had decided that we're going to have a philosophy with children session, and I very much facilitated that. But it was definitely my teacher moment. But I also would introduce them to new materials, introduce them to new ideas, new facts, expose them to new techniques, and all of these things were important parts for them to evolve their own play and also learn and develop a mathematical language. So those 100 languages, some of them I introduced to extend their play and extend their ability to communicate with each other. So as I mentioned in the webinar, I explained that during a philosophy session, if the children were started talking about something that was not what the group was talking about, so they went off on a different tangent, I would say, I hear you, but that's not what we're talking about right now. And mention that but I will listen to you later if you would like to tell me about it then. So that we didn't go in a different direction unless there was consent in the whole group. If the whole group were to say, no, we prefer to talk about that, then we would move on to that topic, because the children are the ones that were deciding. But this was a really good way of helping the children to learn how to stay on topic and not to lose focus and go in other directions, which can be absolutely wonderful. Lunchtime was full of such conversations, but just during the philosophy session, that's what we're doing. Or if we were reading a story and suddenly they start talking about something else, I will again point out, this is not what we're talking about. This is not connected to the story. I find that really interesting. Can I talk about it later? And I think if children know that you will come back to it later, then it becomes less of a problem, because there's that trust. If children keep pressing and wanting to talk about it right now, I think often it starts with the fact that they don't trust that you will remember to talk about it later. So remembering to talk about it later and saying, remember that thing you mentioned during the philosophy session or while we were reading the book? I would love if you could talk to me about it now, if you have time. And then the child has the power to say, no, I'm too busy, I'm playing, or they'll start babbling away and telling you what it is. And I think that's part of creating this environment where children can have a random thought, but can be brought back to the group. And it is not seen as dissent, it's just seen as a natural way of how children's brains go in multiple directions at the same time, but also how we're supporting them to keep on track on one topic and explore it together with others, without denying them the possibility that we can go in different directions too. So managing dissent or different opinions amongst children, well, whenever they engage in dialogue, and I think it depends. I think a lot of what I was doing in the artwork was about giving them the opportunity to not agree with each other. So there was a lot of these together paintings that I mentioned, where the children had to take turns, and if they wanted to change colour, they had to ask another person who was painting with them at the time. And they learned about consent, and they learned about, if I don't like waiting a long time, maybe someone else doesn't. So there's a lot of opportunities to practice safely not agreeing, and practice safely having different opinions. And I think if they don't practice all of these things, it becomes seen as dissent when they can't agree. And they get heated because they don't have the words and they haven't been practicing how to listen. And I think this is what we're doing. If dialogue is always being taught as I'm talking and sharing my opinion, and not I am listening to learn from your opinion, then we're not going to actually get to a point of children being able to communicate their ideas and build on each other's ideas together and create that sense of community. So a lot of the in-between activities were, in between the philosophy with children, were to give the children the skills they needed to be able to have dialogues without agreeing with each other. Because agreement wasn't necessary, but understanding each other's point of view was, and that required the listening. That required supporting the children to be able to articulate what it is and why they had those opinions. And that isn't an overnight skill. They need time to really build on the skills and the self-regulation that requires too. So there's a lot of work that goes into giving children the skills that they need to be able to listen to each other with different opinions. So what do I think are the essentials in a Reggio-inspired environment? I think the most essential is an educator that is open to listen to what the children have to say, who is open and is working on their own bias and prejudice about what they think children are, what they think play is, how they think children learn, and how they think children should behave. We need to be open and question all of these things so that we can see, how are the children actually learning? How does their play fit in alongside with the learning and the teaching? What is it that the children are doing as they're interacting with the world? What kind of materials could I add to that? So really using the third teacher. I love the idea of the third teacher, that the environment that we are in is also inspiring the way that the children think. So I talk about the play ecosystem. And so that's the things that we have in the space, the actual physical space itself, the adults that are in there and all of their opinions, the children and all of their ideas and the way that they interact and the sounds and the smells and everything. The context of every setting as well impacts it, because how it is here in Sweden will be very different from what it is in the Philippines, from what it is in Italy. And so the culture and the politics and our attitudes towards and views of childhood and play are also going to impact the play ecosystem and what we think is allowed or not allowed, or what is possible, or what competent child means. I think a lot of people think and agree with the idea of the competent child, but then they don't allow the children to remain competent because they do too much stuff for them, or protect them from the adventurous kind of play and experiencing nature and testing out and making mistakes and being allowed to be sad and frustrated and working out how to overcome all of these emotions too. So there's a lot of things that we can support children with. Again, these together paintings, you can see the light table there with many hands on. Before they got to doing it with very many children, they'd all been able to experience the light table and painting either one at a time, depending on their needs, or two at a time, so they had enough space and time to be able to discover, what is this material? How can I play? How does it work? What can I do with it? What happens if I do this? Can I ask for more? Can this happen? How much space do I need? If I go over into someone's area, how will it affect them? So all of these questions can be asked without quite so many hands at the same time. And first, after they've had this experience and have developed this knowledge, they are given this opportunity with many children at the same time, which gives more challenges and more discussions are needed, and more thinking about how much space can one child have. What happens if one takes all of the space? There's hardly anything for the others, and what kind of discussions and arguments and confrontations will happen then, or will they be able to safely practice their problem solving skills and their conflict solving skills in these kind of situations? So this is what I'm always thinking about. How can I create opportunities for children to experience things from new perspectives? I also giving them the opportunity to test things out and learn. Me as an adult being open and listening, creating a listening environment for all of the children, I think is very important. And the pedagogy of listening became something that I was attracted to very quickly. And then as I went into the philosophy with children approach, it became even more essential about what is listening, and how can I help the children to listen to each other, not just my own listening of the children. I also think democracy is an incredibly important word, and democracy is one of the first words in the Swedish curriculum, and democracy is one of the reasons why the Reggio Emilia approach was kind of created in the first place. And I think democracy for me is about every child being able to participate, every child being able to know what their rights are and to be able to take part in their rights and use their rights without limiting the rights of others. So this is rights and responsibility part of it. It's about influencing and participation and empathy and respect. And so all of these words, the words that I'm trying to support the children so that every child is included. And as an autistic person, making sure that every child is included and not just the normative children has been something that has been really close to my heart, and ensuring that all children take responsibility. And it's not just the children with special needs or special rights or alternative ways of viewing the world and interacting with the world, however you like to think about that. I think what is important that it's not just that child that has to do all the work and not the group helping each other like you would in an ecosystem. So I often consider myself as like bilingual. I talk neurotypical, but I also talk autistic. And what I find is that in the neurotypical world, they just get on and they just talk their one language of neurotypical and do not think about that they have a responsibility to learn autistic so they know how to communicate with us. There's just this expectation that autistic people have to learn both languages to behave in that. So all of the work is on the autistic person. So how I've been working from a democratic point of view, which essentially is inspired both by the Reggio Emilia approach, by the Swedish curriculum, and now very essential to the original learning approach, is creating environments where all of the children support each other, and children who need support to access their rights are not forced to do all the work themselves. We help each other. So my top tips on how to be a better listener to children, especially when it's hard to be 100% mindful in the classroom. So my top tip has been that I personally have been going out and taking photographs, which I've been using the hashtag slow down, look closely, listen deeply. And by taking these really close-up photographs of things, I've been learning to notice things in a different way. Things look different when they're closer up. But it also means I have to slow down my whole way of being and being at peace to be able to notice what it is that I want to go and take a photograph of, to think of things, to be aware of it. And this slowing down of my being and knowing when I'm open, by practicing it like every day for the last 10 years now. And in the last 3 years, I've been actively walking the forest to learn from the forest. I've been indigenizing my way of being, so decolonizing and indigenizing. That I began to learn the difference in my own sense of being when I was with the children. I could tell that when I was stressed and my head was busy I'm preoccupied with my own thoughts and what's going on and planning and doing this, that I couldn't notice what the children were doing because my head was too busy. And I have moments like that in the forest when I'm walking in the forest where suddenly I realized I haven't noticed much that has been going on as I've been walking because my head was so busy in thought. I was seeing, but I wasn't observing and noticing. I was hearing, but I wasn't listening. And it's the same when I'm in the classroom. If I'm that busy and my head's preoccupied, I'm seeing and hearing, but I am not observing and listening. And so practicing how to feel slow and to accept a normal flow of the day rather than these are the things I need to do. I stopped thinking that there are a lot of musts and start thinking about how is the brain unfolding and what pace does that go? And it should go at a slower pace. It doesn't mean it's slow, it just means it's kind of unhurried. Like Alison Clark talks about the unhurried child. And for me, this unhurried feeling means there isn't that stress of must. It's at a pace that supports myself and the children to be open to the possibilities and the wonders and the curiosities of the world. And sometimes that can go really fast and it's intense, but we're in full focus and we notice everything then because it's not all distracted by busyness. And other times it's slow and it's a more harmonious and it's different. But all of these different rhythms and harmonies are unhurried. And I think that's what we have to practice ourselves about how do I feel when I'm unhurried so that I can notice it. Like, okay, I'm in the classroom and suddenly I'm not noticing, so that I can go, I have to switch on my listening and noticing again. And I think for me, it's been the best way to really practice in nature and to be aware of it. I think there's a lot of things we learn to accept with children's development and children's play, and trusting that the children are competent also helps you slow down and to be able to listen in the classroom too. So these were the questions that I was asked. I hopefully they've given some more wiggle room for the thinking and reflecting. I hope they've answered the questions. I try to answer them from my own experience, and I think what we always have to do is listen to the stories and the answers that I have given, go read and find out more from other people and their opinions, and then also think and reflect yourself. What is it that you know? What is it that is your experience? How is the play making you feel? Why does it make you feel that way? What about the learning? How are the children reacting to the learning? And why is that? So really asking the questions about what, why, how, when, all of these questions about everything that we're doing so that we can understand and to really kind of pause before we act just enough to be able to think, am I going to be interacting, intervening, or interfering? And if we're interacting, then we're coming as an equal. And interacting, again, as I mentioned before, can be about just observing and letting the children get on with their play. The intervening is to make sure that they're as safe as necessary and to give them the support that they need to continue with their learning or to continue with their play, whatever flow that they are in. And interfering is something that we need to avoid as much as possible. And if we can pause just a moment that allows us to avoid interfering, then I think this is something that is very worthwhile. And I think that comes from this slowing down and that mini pause just to check, am I doing a knee-jerk reaction because I think this is scary or because that's inappropriate or I'm worried they can't do it? It can give you a pause. Do I really need to go in there? How do I need to go in there? What will happen to the children if I do go in? What kind of approach should I have? And to always, always enter a situation with curiosity rather than control. Go find out why they're doing that rather than how to control that. And to always remember that children have their entire childhoods to practice being kind, while we as adults, we always have to be